What if everything you thought you knew about fueling for an Ironman was wrong? Some athletes are claiming massive performance breakthroughs by going low carb, while others are piling on more carbs than ever. In this video, I'll reveal what the science actually tells us about these opposing approaches and who's likely to stand on the podium in coming years. And if you're new here, then hey, I'm James. I'm a registered sports and exercise nutritionist. I work with amateur and pro triathletes to help them train and race better, recover faster, and do all of this in a healthy and sustainable way. Now, I have had so many questions and comments on this channel about low carb approaches for endurance exercise, and specifically around triathlon and Ironman racing. It's really not uncommon for me to regularly get someone comment or email asking whether low carb approaches are safe and whether they should do them. Now, I am all about strategies that are going to maximize performance. I want people to race to the best of their ability and enjoy it. And I also want them to be healthy too. And that means balancing the pros versus cons of any nutrition strategy. So we're going to dive into why this topic keeps fascinating triathletes and whether low carb approaches could start dominating triathlon. Let's start by understanding why low carb approaches are so tempting for endurance athletes, especially those doing Ironman events. The average lean triathlete stores around 2,000 to 2,500 calories worth of carbohydrates in their muscle and liver. Now, that might sound like a lot, but during an Ironman, you'll likely burn 8,000 or 10,000 calories. Meanwhile, even a lean triathlete carries 50,000 calories worth of fat, more than enough to complete multiple Ironman races. So the logic behind low carb approaches makes sense on paper. Train your body to better access this massive energy reserve and you'll never run out of fuel. Proponents of low-carb diets for endurance athletes argue that when you restrict carbohydrates, your body produces more fat-burning enzymes. You potentially get some increase in your mitochondrial density, and all of this potentially improves your ability to utilize fat during exercise. And this is often cited as becoming fat-adapted. And there are some legitimate physiological adaptations that occur. Studies do show that after several weeks on a low-carb diet, athletes can increase their fat oxidation rates. That is, they burn more fat at the same exercise intensity compared to when they were on a high-carb diet. And this sounds amazing in theory, but there's a catch. Actually, several catches, and that the popular articles and books often gloss over. The first major issue with low carb approaches is what happens to your ability to use carbohydrates for fuel. Here's what many people don't realize. When you specifically follow a low carb approach, your ability to use carbohydrates is going to be much lower than when you consume carbohydrates regularly in your diet. So putting this into context, this means your capacity to perform in certain situations is going to be worse. For example, high-intensity efforts during training or racing, perhaps the surge at the start of a swim, pushing up a hill, or putting in a final surge of effort at the end of a race. These higher intensity efforts predominantly rely on carbohydrate metabolism, not fat, and this is where the theory of low-carb approaches begins to break down in practice. And this also means that your ability to use carbohydrates during training is lower too. So your top end efforts where you're really trying to work hard are just not going to be as productive. Now, one of the other things I've heard said on this channel so many times is, well, there is gluconeogenesis. You can make your own glucose. Your body always has enough glucose. But this is just simply not true. The amount of glucose you need to actually be able to perform high intensity exercise is way more than you can actually produce through gluconeogenesis. This is part of the reason why whenever you look at high intensity performance in the studies, it is always worse on low carb or ketogenic diets. It is simply not true to say that gluconeogenesis can produce enough glucose to support this. So what does the research actually tell us about low carb diets and endurance performance? The most comprehensive investigations into this question come from the Supernova studies, led by Dr. Louise Burke of Australia. These studies specifically looked at elite race walkers, not exactly triathletes, but endurance athletes nonetheless. What they found was striking. Athletes following a ketogenic diet showed increased fat burning capacity as expected, but their race performance declined on average. Despite having all of the fat burning potential, they couldn't translate it into faster race times. In fact, their exercise efficiency, so how much energy they used to move at a given pace, actually got worse on a ketogenic diet. They were burning more fat, but they had to expend more energy overall to maintain the same pace. This efficiency piece is crucial because in an Ironman, efficiency is everything. The most successful athlete isn't necessarily the one who can burn the most fat. It's the one who can move the fastest while using the least amount of energy. I know what some of you might be thinking, but what about all of these success stories? These athletes can't be wrong, can they? And that's a fair point. Anecdotes and case studies do matter, and there are certainly athletes who report feeling better and performing better on low-carb approaches. This brings us to an important nuance in this discussion: individual variability. Some athletes might genuinely perform better on low-carb approaches. There could be several reasons for this. Previous diet quality. If an athlete moves from a poor quality processed food diet to a whole foods based low carb diet, they'll likely see some benefits regardless of the macronutrient composition. Digestive issues. Some athletes do struggle with GI distress during races when consuming typical high carb fueling strategies. For these individuals, a lower carb approach might reduce these symptoms. Metabolic factors. There may be genetic or metabolic factors that make some individuals better suited to fat oxidation. We don't know everything. Training specificity. Athletes who do most of their training at very low intensities might be less affected by the limitations of low carb approaches. I've seen some fantastic success stories on low carb diets, and I'm not saying that they don't have a place for people. But, and this is important, for every success story, I have seen multiple triathletes try low carb approaches and have then seen their performance stagnate or decline. Many come back reporting reduced training quality, longer recovery times, and an inability to hit their previous power or pace numbers. I've even seen some athletes get pretty unwell by doing this approach, but they bounce back and feel fantastic when they add carbs in. So this is actually something I go through in my low carbohydrate module in the Tri-Fuel Academy. This is my triathlon nutrition course that covers everything within nutrition for triathletes. So it covers daily nutrition, your macros, what to eat before, during and after training, low carb approaches. It covers race nutrition, everything within that, including heat acclimation, as well as sections on weight loss and body composition. You can get access to all of this as part of a membership to The Hub, which is my nutrition membership for triathletes, to take you from someone who struggles with nutrition to someone who uses it as their strength. It'll help you to totally transform your approach to nutrition by completely nailing all of your training sessions as well as your races too. So if you want to race your next Ironman to the best of your ability, then check out The Hub. Link is in the description and comment section of this video. Now let's look at what the most successful Ironman athletes in the world are actually doing when it comes to nutrition. If low carb approaches were truly superior, we'd expect to see the top pros adopting these strategies en masse. But that's not what we're seeing at all. Instead, what we're observing is elite Ironman athletes trying to maximize their carbohydrate intake, both in training and especially during races. There are some crazy numbers going around in elite triathlon, with some of them trying to push 150 grams of carbs per hour, maybe even 180 grams. They're constantly experimenting with ways to increase their carb absorption during races, not restricting it. And to be clear, these athletes aren't just blindly following conventional wisdom. Some of them will have access to the best scientists and nutritionists in the world. They'll conduct their own testing, and they'll make decisions based on what actually improves performance. And what they've consistently found? It's that carbohydrates fuel performance. So where does this leave us? Should all Ironman athletes be on high carb diets all of the time? Not necessarily. There may be a case for certain individuals to follow low carb diets during both training and racing, and I certainly don't advise triathletes to just smash all the carbs all of the time. Some training sessions might be appropriate to do without carbohydrates. So for example, if they're less than an hour long and they are genuinely easy. And some of your longer sessions might only require 30 grams of carbs per hour. But practically speaking, most triathletes should follow these recommendations. Base your everyday diet on quality whole foods. Regardless of your carbohydrate intake, focus first on food quality. Vegetables, fruits, lean proteins, healthy fats, and whole grains if you're including them. Match carbohydrate intake to training demands. On days with harder or longer sessions, eat more carbs. On recovery days or days with very light training, you could reduce your carbs if you prefer, but I'd still recommend them. Practice your race nutrition strategy during training. Whatever approach you plan to use on race day, make sure you've tested it extensively in training. Approach radical changes cautiously. If you want to experiment with lower carb approaches, do so gradually during a less critical phase, not right before an important race. For race day, prioritize fuel over ideology. Even if you train with lower carbs sometimes, most athletes will benefit from higher carb intake during an Ironman event itself. The question of whether low carb triathletes will dominate Ironman events has a pretty clear answer based on the current evidence. It's unlikely. I'm sorry to disappoint you, my low carb friends. While there may be individual athletes who thrive on lower carb approaches, the physiological realities of endurance performance, the bulk of scientific research, and the practices of the world's best triathletes all point towards carbohydrates remaining a crucial fuel source for optimal Ironman performance. Now, part of Ironman performance means fueling well properly before your training sessions, and in this video here, I go through the best ways to do that.